They laughed until he walked in. No music, no warning. Just the slow turn of the glass door, and the room stopped breathing. A charcoal gray suit, perfectly tailored, a tie without color, a face without expression. But everyone knew, this man didn't need an introduction. He moved through the boutique like he belonged to another atmosphere, where time didn't rush and silence was the loudest thing in the room. His shoes made no sound, yet his presence pressed down like weight on glass. He didn't scan the crowd. He didn't ask questions. He stopped exactly where the damage had been done, at the velvet podium where someone had once smirked, too sure, too early. Who humiliated her here? His voice didn't tremble. It cut cleanly, leaving no room for denial. No one answered, but eyes darted, breath hitched. A stylist dropped a clipboard. At the far corner of the boutique, she sat, still, poised, one hand wrapped around a cold teacup, the other resting calmly on her lap. She didn't move, didn't blink. She didn't need to. She had been there long enough. She had heard the laughter, the whispers, the forced politeness masking quiet contempt. And now she watched it all unravel without lifting a single finger. Because this moment wasn't about drama. It was about reckoning. And though no names were said, reputations began to fracture. It wasn't fear in the air. It was recognition. They didn't know who she was, but they knew, too late, that she wasn't someone you dismiss. And it all began with one quiet question. May I take a look at that dress? She stepped inside with a kind of ease that didn't ask for permission, but didn't demand attention either. A white cotton shirt, crisp but plain, tucked neatly into a soft linen skirt that brushed just below her knees. Sandals, flat, worn, too quiet for a place like this, clicked softly on the polished marble floor. Around her, velvet-lined walls whispered exclusivity, the kind that priced politeness above sincerity and judged character by the sheen of a handbag. The lighting was warm but intentional, casting long shadows on glass counters filled with accessories that cost more than most monthly rents. At the reception desk, the hostess offered a tight smile, dipping her head slightly as trained, but her eyes flicked down and back up too fast. Ma'am, are you sure you have a reservation here? Her tone was sweet, but behind it lingered a blade, one polished by years of practice. Her glance said what her words did not. You don't look like you belong. The woman nodded gently, her voice barely above a whisper. I understand. No offense taken, no indignation sparked. Just a faint smile, a calm breath. And then silence. She stood still for a second longer than necessary, eyes moving slowly across the room, not with curiosity, but with a strange familiarity, as if cataloging changes since her last visit. A young intern behind the counter hesitated, his eyes narrowing slightly as recognition stirred. He dipped his head in a quiet nod of respect, only to be met with a sharp glare from the floor manager who stood nearby, arms crossed beneath a tight blazer, lips pursed with forced hospitality. The woman turned away, unfazed, and walked further in. A man accompanied her, dressed in clean lines and solid neutrals, his watch sleek but unbranded. He leaned toward her slightly, his voice soft and low. If you'd rather leave, I'll get the car. She smiled without looking at him, eyes instead fixed on the curated mess of high fashion ahead. No, I want to see how far they'll take it. Her tone was casual, but there was an undertone of patience, of weight, of someone who had been here before, maybe not in this exact place, but in the same pattern. She took a seat near the side, politely declining the champagne offered only to others. Around her, fabrics whispered wealth, clients laughed with the certainty of belonging, and staff drifted past her like she was a display piece gone dull. But she watched, unblinking, her presence quiet but solid, as if she were waiting for a show to begin, not quite amused, not quite surprised. No one saw her as a storm, just a breeze passing through silk, and yet the air had shifted the moment she walked in. Even the chandelier above, with its rows of delicate crystal, seemed to hold its breath. Everything sparkled, but something had already cracked beneath the surface. She had been sitting quietly for 10 minutes, still as stone, eyes calm but alert, when the laughter started. Soft at first, but too pointed to mistake for anything else. Across the boutique, a woman draped in silk and diamonds leaned into her friend's ear and whispered just loud enough for the room to catch it. That's adorable. Someone brought the help to window shop. Her companion smirked, not bothering to hide it, then glanced over with the kind of look people reserve for things they don't think will ever matter. The woman in white linen did not blink. She simply adjusted the sleeve of her shirt and continued observing the boutique as if she were watching a play unravel on cue. A few steps away, the floor manager cleared his throat gently and approached with a practiced smile that stopped just short of warmth. "Madam," he said, tone syrupy and measured, "I'm afraid we have certain service standards here. If you're just browsing, the takeaway catalog is available at the rear exit." He gestured, not overtly, but just enough to suggest she might feel more comfortable elsewhere. Two nearby customers chuckled behind manicured hands. The woman still said nothing. She reached calmly into her bag, pulled out her phone, and typed a message with the same grace she'd shown walking in. It was a short one. "Can you come by now?" No punctuation, no urgency. Just a quiet note sent into the world, like a dropped stone into deep water. She set the phone face down beside her and let her hand rest lightly on the table, fingers grazing a plain, unadorned band around her pinky. A waiter passed her without acknowledging her presence, despite the fact she had been seated longer than the couple he was currently offering champagne to. One of them glanced at her again and whispered, "Maybe she's a blogger or something. They let anyone in these days if they've got followers." The floor manager circled back, his smile now tightened, controlled, like he was managing a situation rather than serving a guest. "Are you expecting someone, ma'am?" he asked, not because he cared, but because the silence around her was starting to make people uncomfortable. She looked up at him, not hostile, not meek, just present. "Yes," she said simply, "but I'm fine for now." That answer didn't satisfy him. He lingered a beat too long, then turned and walked away with the kind of stiffness that meant he didn't like not knowing how to handle her. At the front, a younger employee whispered something under her breath before excusing herself to the back. Another guest, wearing a high-end dress clearly designed for visibility, took a step closer, as if curious, then said with mock concern, "Sweetheart, do you know this place isn't for fittings? They don't sell linen here." It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it, with the effortless cruelty of someone who'd never been on the outside of anything in her life. The woman in the white shirt smiled faintly, not out of kindness, but recognition. She had heard all of this before. Not those exact words, perhaps, but the melody was the same. Around her, the boutique carried on, music playing softly, stylists floating by with racks of couture, perfume in the air like privilege you could inhale. But now, the temperature had shifted. Something in her stillness, her refusal to flinch, had turned their amusement into uncertainty. Her phone buzzed once on the table. She glanced down, read the reply, then tapped a quick response with a single hand. No flourish, no drama. Then she returned to her tea, raising the cup with care, as though this moment deserved civility, even if the room did not. The silence around her deepened. The manager tried again, now with a higher-pitched version of hospitality. "Would you like to try something on while you wait?" He meant, would you like to be somewhere out of sight? She set her cup down and looked up at him with a gaze that was neither confrontational nor deferential, just deliberate. "No, thank you," she said. "I'm comfortable here." He nodded, lips thin, and stepped back. One by one, others began to notice the tension. The intern from earlier returned, hovering awkwardly, clearly recognizing her, but unsure whether to speak. The woman turned to him briefly, nodded once, and he seemed to relax. But then the door opened again. The woman didn't look up, not yet. She didn't need to. The weight of presence had entered the room, unmistakable and cold. Across the boutique, voices fell into hushed confusion. For now, she simply sat, fingers back on the table, the ring on her pinky catching the light. Whatever was coming had already been set in motion. She had seen what they were. Now it was their turn to see who she really was. And this time, no one would be able to look away. In a place built on appearance, they had failed the one test that truly mattered. And though they wouldn't admit it, every eye in the room was now watching her, not because they saw her differently, but because they feared they hadn't seen her at all. The door opened again, and this time it didn't creak or swing. It entered. A man in a dark suit stepped through, the kind of suit that didn't advertise a brand because it didn't need to. No flashy logo, no statement pattern, just precise lines. Fabric that hung like it had been sewn for his frame alone, and a stillness in his gait that said he was never late because the room always adjusted to his pace. He moved with quiet gravity, scanning the boutique not like a shopper, but like someone assessing the condition of a place he might soon own. Heads turned, the air, which had begun to curdle with tension, now pressed in like a sealed envelope. Staff straightened, a few guests stepped aside instinctively, and then he saw her, still seated, still calm, still holding the same teacup with both hands. He offered a small nod, not to her, but to himself, as if confirming a calculation, then turned his gaze toward the floor manager. "Robert," he said, smiling thinly. The use of his name wasn't an introduction, it was a summons. The manager stiffened, throat twitching as he stepped forward. "Sir?" "Yes, can I help you?" The man didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Were you the one assisting this guest from the beginning?" Robert's eyes darted toward the woman in linen and back, his voice cracking slightly. "Yes, I welcomed her." The man tilted his head, no longer smiling. "Welcomed." A pause. Interesting choice of words. A silence fell so sharply it could have sliced silk. Then he spoke again, slowly, like every word mattered. "This woman you tried to usher out, do you know who she is?" No answer came, so he didn't wait for one. "She is the founder and executive chef of the Ardent Group. Perhaps you've heard of them. No?" His gaze swept the staff. 5 restaurants, 3 countries, 2 Michelin stars, but no press photos, no red carpet. Because while others were styling themselves for this month's influencer list, she was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, hands burned, building a name that didn't need to be worn on a label. Murmurs rippled through the boutique, quiet and fast, like wind under a closed door. The manager blinked rapidly, mouth slightly open, but no sound came out. Near the edge of the boutique, the young intern who had nodded to her earlier took a step back, eyes wide with realization. The older woman hadn't moved. She simply set her cup down on its saucer with a soft clink, then folded her hands in her lap, waiting. Another guest, the same one who had laughed earlier, leaned toward her companion and whispered, "Is that the chef from the Forbes article? The one who built everything from scratch?" Her voice now held none of the confidence it had an hour ago. Another chimed in quietly. "I think she turned down a reality show deal last year, said she wasn't interested in being famous." The man in the dark suit turned again toward the manager. "You see, Robert, when someone like her walks in, you don't judge the shoes. You check the weight of the silence she carries. That silence was earned in fire, not bought in velvet." He gestured toward the woman, who now raised her eyes and met his gaze, not with gratitude, but with shared understanding. They had clearly spoken many times before. She was no stranger to being overlooked, and he was no stranger to making people regret it. "The reason she dresses simply," he added, "is because she doesn't owe anyone a performance. She isn't here to impress. She's here to observe. And today, what she saw was disappointing." At this, the boutique manager looked down at his own shoes, suddenly aware of how loud their polish felt. The guests who had watched her with idle curiosity now looked anywhere but in her direction, as if ashamed of what they hadn't seen. In the corner, the intern's voice was barely a whisper. "She taught at the academy once. Just one class. Everyone said it changed how they cook." And then, like an echo from the past catching up to the present, a ripple of recognition spread through the room. People who had dismissed her presence now felt the weight of their own assumptions. The staff who had avoided eye contact now stole glances filled with guilt. The man in the tailored suit took one step back and folded his hands in front of him. "This shop prides itself on refinement," he said, "but you've confused price with value. There is a difference. And today, that difference walked in wearing sandals." Still, the woman didn't rise, didn't gloat, didn't even speak. Her hands rested on her lap, and the quiet in the boutique became something heavy, something honest. The manager finally cleared his throat, but whatever apology he meant to form was caught in his mouth. He knew it was too late for words. A customer whispered near the jewelry counter, "She once cooked for the royal family, but she never took credit. That's how she is." The boutique was no longer the same room she had entered. The velvet still shimmered, the lights still glowed, but beneath it all, a different current now flowed. One built not on fashion, but on humility, regret, and a belated recognition of grace. The woman reached for her tea again, and as she took a slow sip, the man beside her, her advocate, perhaps her partner, watched the room settle into its silence. No one had to raise a voice. The truth had already arrived, and this time, it wasn't leaving quietly. The second man arrived with no entourage, no sound to announce him, only presence. He wore a pair of black leather gloves, which he removed slowly as he walked, each movement deliberate. No watch, no jewelry, only a suit tailored so precisely it moved like skin. He passed the boutique's front desk without pausing, without glancing at the merchandise or the gawking guests. Every step he took pulled the room tighter, and when he reached her table, he stopped, removed his gloves completely, and placed them gently on the table beside her empty teacup. Then he turned, scanning the floor until his eyes locked on the manager. His voice was quiet, steady, and it carried like a command. "Did my wife experience any difficulty reserving a table today?" The manager, already pale, blinked as though the words had struck him across the face. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, then stammered, I wasn't aware we didn't know she was your..." The man raised a single brow. He didn't need to say anything else. Silence stretched out, trembling with the weight of exposure. Then he nodded once, slowly, like something had been decided. "Very well. I'll be forwarding our experience here today directly to the board of shareholders." A collective inhale moved through the room. Someone dropped their phone. The manager took a step forward as if to apologize, but thought better of it. Behind him, a stylist straightened a coat hanger that didn't need straightening. No one dared speak. A few guests who had been whispering earlier now stood frozen, their smugness evaporating like steam in cold air. A woman with a shopping bag clutched it tighter to her side, as though its brand name might burn. The man turned to face the crowd now, his voice still calm, but with an edge sharp enough to shave glass. "Allow me to clarify for those who have not yet connected the dots. This is Anna Nguyen. She is the co-founder and principal investor behind the Ardent Group, which includes several of this city's top dining establishments and hospitality ventures. And as of last quarter, she is also one of the largest stakeholders in the very luxury retail group that owns this boutique." Gasps spread like a stain. The name rang out in whispered recognition from various corners of the room. Anna Nguyen, the one no one could ever quite pin down. The one whose picture rarely appeared in interviews, whose restaurants never needed publicity because reservations were booked out months in advance. The woman in the linen skirt and sandals had been building an empire while they were still deciding which brand belt matched their shoes, and she had done it without ever needing to raise her voice or seek their approval. Anna didn't flinch. She simply sat, poised, eyes locked on the manager, not with hostility, but with something worse, quiet judgment. He looked away first. Attention rippled through the staff like static electricity. They had misread her, all of them. They had mistaken humility for insignificance, quiet for weakness. In the background, someone whispered, "She bought out half the board last year, didn't even show up to the announcement, sent a thank you note by email." The man who had called her his wife, though it was clear now he was more than that, a partner not just in marriage but in strategy, in empire building, turned back to Anna, then nodded once, as if inviting her to choose what happened next. She shook her head slightly. Not now, not here. That one gesture made the entire boutique seem suddenly smaller. The guests who had laughed before now found excuses to move toward the door. The staff who had looked down on her now couldn't meet her eyes. The intern who had recognized her from the start looked like he might cry. The woman who had called her a blogger now stared at the floor, chewing her lip, her handbag suddenly feeling far too loud. Anna stood, finally. No grand speech, no revenge monologue, just motion, graceful and precise. She looked around once, sweeping the room not like someone seeking attention, but like someone taking stock of damage. She wasn't angry. She didn't need to be. Disappointment clung to her like a veil. Then she walked to the counter, where the same hostess who'd first questioned her reservation now stood frozen. Anna looked at her, offered a polite but firm smile, and said, "Cancel the appointment. I'll send my assistant to retrieve what I need." The hostess nodded so quickly it looked like she might break her neck. Her voice failed her, so she simply stepped aside, opening a path no one had offered earlier. Anna turned and left, her partner beside her, the silence they left in their wake louder than any reprimand. They walked past glass cases filled with dresses that had once felt important, past perfumes once coveted, past people who had once assumed too much. And though the boutique still shimmered, the mirrors along the walls reflected a very different truth now, one that none of them would forget. As the glass doors closed behind them, no one dared speak. It wasn't just shame that filled the space, it was recognition. They had not only misjudged a customer, they had failed a lesson in character. And character, they now understood, came dressed in linen and quiet, not logos and noise. Outside, the couple walked side by side. Anna didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her partner glanced at her, a quiet smile passing between them. He didn't ask if she was okay. He knew. The wind stirred slightly as they reached the waiting car. The driver opened the door with a slight bow, not because of who they were, but because of how they carried what they were. As the door closed, a woman inside the boutique, one who had said nothing at all, turned to the young intern and whispered, "I'll never forget the way she looked at him. Not angry, just certain. That kind of certainty is rare." And inside the boutique, business resumed. But something essential had cracked. A shift, subtle but irreversible, had settled into the walls. From that day on, every time the door opened, every associate looked twice. Every guest was greeted with a little more care, because now they understood. Power doesn't always wear a crown. Sometimes it walks in sandals and drinks tea in silence. And sometimes it doesn't even speak a word. It just waits, lets others reveal who they are, and leaves them standing in the echo of their own behavior. That echo stayed long after she left. It colored the way they judged every customer. It changed the temperature of every greeting. It reminded them, in the most elegant and unforgiving way, that the people you underestimate often turn out to be the very ones who own the floor you're standing on. A week later, the boutique held a staff training session titled Invisible Power: Rethinking First Impressions. They showed no video, used no charts, only recounted the events of that afternoon. No names, just truth. And every associate present that day took notes like their future depended on it. Because maybe it did. In the months that followed, sales improved, but more than that, so did the store's reputation. Quiet shoppers received real attention, regulars noticed warmer greetings, and management began reviewing hiring policies. Anna never returned, but her presence lingered. A framed quote appeared on the staff room wall. "Anyone can look expensive. Few can afford dignity." It hung there not as decoration, but as a daily reminder. New employees were told its story on their first day. Veterans looked at it every time they questioned a guest, because long after the tea went cold, the lesson stayed hot. Never underestimate grace wrapped in silence. Never. The fallout was not delayed. Less than an hour after Anna Nguyen exited the boutique, the floor manager, Robert, was asked to step into the back office. He didn't return. An email circulated shortly after, addressed to all staff, informing them that he had been placed on immediate administrative leave pending review. By morning, the boutique's corporate team issued an internal memo using phrases like brand integrity and standards of excellence. But everyone knew what it meant. The man who had smirked while offering her the takeaway menu was no longer welcome. His name vanished from the employee roster within 24 hours. The boutique's official social media channels posted a carefully crafted apology by noon the next day. It read, "We sincerely regret the experience one of our valued guests endured at our flagship location. This does not reflect the values or expectations we hold for our team. We are addressing the matter with urgency and have taken corrective steps to ensure it does not happen again." Comments flooded in, some in outrage, others in awe. One user wrote, "When a woman can walk in quietly and change the temperature of the room without saying a word, you know you've witnessed something rare." Another said, "Shame on them for needing power to see worth." But nestled between the outrage and corporate speak was a single post that spread faster than any press release. It came from the young intern. No blue checkmark, no PR team, just raw honesty typed into a quiet corner of the internet. It read, "Today I learned that some people enter a room in linen and silence and carry an entire empire behind them." That post was shared thousands of times. Recruiters sent him messages. Leadership blogs quoted him. And though the boutique tried to control the narrative, the story had already taken on a life of its own. People weren't interested in luxury anymore. They were talking about humility, about perception, about what it meant to truly see someone. Inside the boutique, training manuals were rewritten. New policies introduced new phrases: defer judgment, evaluate presence over presentation, value beneath the surface. Anna's name was never mentioned directly again in official channels, but she was everywhere, in tone, in posture, in caution. Staff meetings referenced the incident with a new reverence. A regional director flew in and stood in front of the full team, saying only, "She didn't raise her voice, and yet here we are, rewriting the way we work." Meanwhile, the woman who had whispered about bloggers and linen hadn't returned since. A VIP email address she once used to book fittings was now inactive. She had been seen at another boutique across town, quieter than before, her laughter more guarded. As for the young intern, he stayed, but he was different now, more precise, more deliberate. He stopped assuming and started observing. He greeted every guest with eye contact and curiosity, not calculation. One afternoon, a woman walked in wearing worn ballet flats and a canvas coat. A few months ago, he might have glanced once and moved on. That day, he offered her a seat, a smile, and his full attention. She ended up purchasing 3 items, not because of pressure, but because, as she said while leaving, "I've never felt more seen." The boutique's numbers recovered, slowly but surely. But the real shift couldn't be measured in profit margins. It lived in the pause before a judgment, the restraint in a raised eyebrow, the softening of a tone. Every employee had internalized the lesson: never confuse simplicity with smallness, never assume silence means insignificance, and above all, never forget the woman who didn't need to speak to change everything. Her echo still lived in the glass, the velvet, and the scent of warm tea no one had the courage to serve since. Years later, the intern, now a store manager, stood in the same spot Anna had once sat. He ran his fingers over the table's edge, polished and pristine. A junior associate approached with hesitation, holding a new applicant's resume. "She doesn't look like the others," the associate whispered. The manager took the resume, glanced toward the entrance where a middle-aged woman in plain trousers waited patiently. "Exactly," he said, "and that's why I want to meet her first." That simple reply, passed down and repeated, became a philosophy. Not policy, not rule, but culture. What began as a failure had become a blueprint. And somewhere, though she never came back, Anna would have approved. In quiet moments before the boutique opened each day, some staff claimed they could still feel it. A weight in the air, not heavy, but grounding. A presence that reminded them to look again, to listen harder, to wait before deciding who deserved their best. It wasn't fear. It was reverence. A new associate once asked why there was always a fresh white linen cloth folded on the sideboard. The answer was simple: to remember the woman who changed everything without ever asking for a thing. And perhaps more than any formal policy or public apology, that cloth meant something lasting. It meant someone had left behind a legacy written in behavior, not branding, and it meant that kindness, once witnessed, had become tradition. I was the bartender that day, tucked behind the mirrored bar near the back, polishing stemware and watching the floor with half interest. I'd worked there long enough to know how the rhythm went. Heels clicking, velvet tones, names dropped like business cards. You could tell a guest's worth by how staff straightened when they entered, or by how quickly champagne found their hand. But that woman disrupted the rhythm without a word. She sat where others stood. She waited while others demanded. And she noticed everything. I saw the manager roll his eyes when he thought no one was looking. I saw the hostess's mouth tighten into that almost smile people wear when they think they're better. And I saw her sip tea like she was somewhere she'd already owned 1,000 times over. I didn't know who she was then, but I remember the air shifting when he walked in, gloves in hand, voice soft and final. I remember the silence. I remember the shame. Since that day, I pour every drink with more attention. I greet every guest like they carry stories I haven't heard yet. Because the truth is, you never really know who you're serving until it's too late to serve them well. Respect doesn't always wear labels. Sometimes it arrives quietly, wrapped in patience and clarity. And sometimes that presence wears linen, drinks tea slowly, and leaves a space more honest than it was before. It lingers in posture, in the way others grow still. If you've ever judged someone too quickly, by their shoes, their voice, their stillness, I suggest you think again. Better yet, stick around. There are more stories like this one. Stories that peel back appearances and remind us that dignity doesn't raise its voice. Stories that might shift how you see the world, one guest at a time. Subscribe if you want to hear them. We'll be here, behind the counter, watching and learning, one quiet guest at a time. Some visitors make a scene, but the ones who move in silence, they're the ones who stay with you.